Hi, and thank you so much for listening to the podcast. Today we have an extra special episode for you. This is a collaboration that we did with Christianna Deichmann from APPPAH, the Association for Pre and Perinatal Psychology and Health, and Karlton Terry, who is a world-renowned baby therapist and author. This is such an amazing conversation, and it's coming up right before their Birth Psychology Month, which is going to take place in March. So if you want some more information, please go to birthpsychology.com and please listen to this amazing episode. We know that you're going to get some really great insight from it. Thanks.
Oh my gosh, welcome. This is great. I have some of my favorite people today, and I'm going to introduce you all. And then we're going to get started with our topic, which we were just flowing on before we hit record on this, which is about how having a happy kid or happy kids is a happy family. And I know there's always the saying that it's if mommy's happy, everyone's happy. So now you realize there's this symbiotic relationship that's happening. And here I am today with Karlton Terry, who has been working in and around the pre and perinatal sciences for 30 years plus. Karlton, you've trained
Forever.
It's true. And you specialize in, I want to say, like, decoding babies. Like, you've worked with some of the top psychologists. You've trained with a number of people who have been in the pre and perinatal psychology world. And you really know how to read the cues of babies, and you've learned how their journey that has brought them here to life has all sorts of pit stops or stations along the way. Like, they live a whole universe before they're even born. And
yeah, they do.
It's so important, because now we're here with Danny Pericone and Paloma Garcia. And these two lovely gals are the leaders in this amazing movement, right, with neurosequential development, which is a big word. And they call it In the Cortex, their company. And you help parents and families basically reorganize their brain from things that have gone on during this universe of time that's lapsed with children when they are conceived. And we as a world really are blind, or maybe we just haven't been, the layers haven't been taken off for us to see all the things that go on in the womb space and in the family space. But yet we now know, with neuroscience, epigenetics, and all sorts of psychology and somatic based therapies, that this is the most important time of your life, is the first 1,000 days. And we don't even see or really personally know our children at that time, but yet it's the foundation. So I want to give each of you time to maybe tell a little bit about yourself and how all of us got here together. I know I'm the director of education at APPPAH, which is an organization that promotes the awareness of how this time in the womb is like the most important thing for not only a child, but for our world and our relationships and our social structures. And that's what we're going to unpack a little bit today, is how all of us help bring this awareness to the world, and how we've come up with amazing techniques to really help families thrive. So I don't know who wants to take it away from here and talk a little bit.
I mean, I can
go first.
There's always that awkward. Who's going to go?
I knew that was going to happen. Okay, so I can go first. I'm Paloma Garcia. I'm one of the founders of In the Cortex. And the way that I came to learn about brain reorganization was actually through my brother, because he had a lot of learning challenges and social challenges and just a lot of challenges when he was little. And he did a similar program, actually, the program where Danny and I met in San Diego. He did that when he was about 17 years old, and it completely changed his life. He went from being a person who was constantly facing challenge after challenge after challenge, just all day long, to being himself and being able to go to college, finish college. He lives in Australia alone now. He has a boyfriend. He has his own company. I mean, he's just the most Anybody who meets him nowadays would never think that he ever struggled the way he did when he was younger. And so that really inspired me to start to look at this stuff and really understand what was going on with the brain. Because when I learned about the importance of creeping and crawling and all these different movements in that first year of life, and I saw the change in my brother, and then I saw it in myself, I said, okay, there's something here. This is going to change the world. And so I had a business that I had in Mexico City. I closed it and I moved to San Diego to be Danny's intern in 2014, I think. 13 maybe. Long time ago, right? Maybe. I don't know, but we'd already known each other for a while and I had already been studying it for a bit. And long story short, I worked with Danny for a long time. Then we both went our separate ways for a while. I lived in New York, I lived in Barcelona, and then we came back to do In the Cortex together. And so now here we have it. We have a program that guides people through those movements that they might have missed in that first year of life, because the truth is that the brain is so powerful that it can reconnect the way that it's connected at any age through any experience that we have. That's neuroplasticity. That's the power that it has. And so what we want to do is just help people understand that they have the power. We each have the power to change our brains and to make our brain more efficient and just our lives happier, and not have to try as hard as we maybe have had to be trying our whole lives, right? It's really a lot easier. And like you said, Christiana, one of our biggest passions is sharing this information, and sharing also that while you may not have gotten that stuff in the womb or in that first year, 2 years, 3 years of life, even if you're how old is our oldest
90,
member? 91, 90?
90.
Even
Yeah.
if you're 90 years old, you can still get on the floor and crawl and finish that development and truly give your brain the neurological foundation that it's been craving your whole life. And that's what we're all about. I also have a master's in neurodevelopmental disorders and another one, neurological rehabilitation. So that's kind of added on to what we have been doing for all this time.
Oh my
Amazing.
gosh, I'm so excited to hear from you too, Danny, because I I discovered this outside of the two of you, but now some of my clients I've referred to you because it's just such a foundational program that you can do that supports the type of somatic based therapies that I offer in my practice, which is cranial sacral therapy and different aspects of this pre and perinatal education, which Karlton's going to unpack, because we're like, wait a second, healing happens in the now. And ultimately, our
Mhm.
goals are all like, we really would love for people to have this knowledge before they even, think of becoming a family. But in the world that we live in, we have so much to uncover just from ourselves and where we've come from. So I love this program, how it's any age at any time. And how does it connect to your birth? I know Karlton's going to unpack that a little bit here in a minute, of how and why you get to this point because of the birth. And you're talking about crawling and creeping, which I know some of the people on this call may be like, wait, what? How does crawling have to do with how I think or act right now? So maybe Danny, you can tell us a little bit about who you are, how you came to it, and why does crawling tie into this?
Definitely. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having us. And so I'm Danny. I'm the other half of In the Cortex. I have been doing this work for now 14 years. I got into it similarly because my brother also was very, very challenged. He was labeled with so many different things. My parents went through every avenue they possibly could 40 or 30 years ago, trying to figure out how to help him not be so angry. He was just a very angry child. And they just couldn't, went through everything. My mom stumbled across Paul Dennison, who's the founder of Brain Gym. And to be clear, Paloma and I are not the founders of these movements and practical modalities. We have just been trained in them, and we've put it together into a program to make it accessible and affordable for anyone. That was always our big thing, was making it so it's accessible and something that everyone can do around the world.
Yes.
So my mom learned about Brain Gym, and then she turned me on to brain reorganization. And when she told me about it, I was like, Mom, you're absolutely nuts. Like, there's no way you can get on the floor and crawl like a baby and then your life gets easier. So I did not buy in for a while until I actually lived in Ecuador, and I was living after I graduated college. I was a Division I athlete, and I was just a hot mess, literally running across the campus always late, never could keep anything organized, just always felt like I was just reacting to life. And I was the Danimal in college. Like I was really thought I was out there to end people's lives versus just play a sport, right? It was just really distorted in my mind. So I was like, always like, oh yeah, movements, I can do it. So anyways, once I graduated college, moved to another country, I still came back and I was like, what am I doing with my life? And then I found ABA therapy and I was like, this doesn't resonate with me. And I just kept searching for answers of like, what am I doing with my life? And then I finally was like, okay, mom, I'll listen to you. What's this brain organization? So I got a job working for someone and I just ended up being the right-hand person and learned and absorbed it all. And I was like, this is me. I am a disorganized brain. And so then I put myself on the floor. And so here's the piece that you were just asking about. You put yourself into these positions. And this is what's so cool and so hopeful for everyone out there is that at any age, at any point in your life, neuroplasticity can come into effect. And so you don't have to, we always talk about those first 3 years and they are super critical and important. But at any point in your life, you can go back and you can rewrite your story. And this is why we love our work because there's hope for anyone. And so you put yourself in these positions and we guide you through this in our program. And then we ask you to move. And the way you move literally tells us where your brain left off in development. And so many people are like, no way. Okay, wait, I'm curious. And they'll do a 30-second movement and we can say, okay, this is what your life looks like. And we can rattle off all these different signs and like, how did you know that about me? Because the way you move shows us what you have access to, what automatic functions are in place and what isn't in place in how your brain is processing the world. So we can say by the way you move, if you're only moving with what we'd say 10% development, you're somebody who, if you're driving in your car and someone cuts you off, you're going to fly off the handle because you find it as a personal attack. You're like, that was a life-threatening thing that just happened to me. So now I'm going to react. So we say, well, if you do this movement enough, your brain all of a sudden wakes up and goes, oh, I know what to do. I just wasn't given the environment to do it. And then once the brain goes through the process of moving in a certain way, all of a sudden the automatic functions that weren't there come online. And now you free up your brain to be able to handle life for what it is. And so it's just this really cool thing that we all have coded within us. And what we do in the cortex is we just show you how to find that. And it changed my life. And so once I found this work, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not a hot mess. I don't need to have anxiety. I don't need to yell and scream at everybody. Like that's not the real me. And so once I did these movements, I found this is how you regulate your nervous system. And now as a mom, I have 2 small children, a 4 and a 7-year-old. I could not imagine motherhood without having this because we all have those moments in motherhood where we're like, just listen, I asked you to do that one thing. And it's hard, right? It takes you to a level you've never experienced in life where you have people who depend on you, right? And so for me, it's a must. I have to regulate my nervous system every day to be a better mom. And so that's where our work combined with what Karlton does is just fascinating because it just unlocks all these possibilities of how else you can be the best version of yourself. And that's what I think we're all striving to do is how do we feel better every day without having to work too much harder?
It makes a lot of sense. And that's why I can feel so much energy in this call. And that's why I'm going to call in Karlton, who has this like
Yes.
nice settling effect
Yes.
with all your wisdom. I have 2 children myself, a 13-year-old and a 6-year-old. And my 13-year-old and I went through brain gym practices when she was 8 because, she and I, Danny, were a lot like you're describing. And that's when I started asking questions. I used to get so upset that I was never told this information. But one of the most empowering things I can tell every parent listening to this call or any individual is that you should always research. You should always ask questions. Don't just be handed the information that is given to us in this world, and you will discover so much more. And one of the joys about my life and my youngest now is when Karlton Terry entered my life years ago. He doesn't even know this, but years ago, when I was first pregnant with my son, my youngest, his name kept popping up in all the research that I was doing, along with a couple other people like Dr. Emerson and Frank Lake, like all of these people who kind of started this revolution around nurture science.
Mm-hmm.
And that is like, you hear that today, is like exploring the science of nurture and how far we've gone off path. And Karlton taught people around the world how there's a story, an emotional based story to every single one of our souls that come into this planet, and that it's sacred and profound and so vulnerable. And I know, Karlton, maybe that's why you can tell us a little bit about what it is that you do and what got you into listening to babies.
I started realizing that the more vulnerable a human being is, if they're met with a challenge or if they're hurt or injured, it goes in deeper.
Mm.
It just isn't, there's not a lot of protection. And so we don't, in my world, we don't really start with birth. We start much earlier. But I like to start with birth for most people because everybody can relate to birth. Birth, everybody has a birth story. They know where they were born. They know what their parents have told them. Um, Often their birth story is not the same as the birth story of the parent.
Mm-hmm.
And we can find that the birth story is really encoded in the body. And for years now, there have been a lot of very convincing arguments that the mind exists throughout the body. It's not just in the brain, and that our feelings and our emotions exist in our body. And now more and more people are giving credit and really waking up to the whole idea of implicit memories.
Yes.
And implicit memories are deep, strong memories held in the body and in different parts of the body. And we can map them and find them. We can find out how old they were. We can find out where they came from. We can do all this wonderful stuff now.
Mm-hmm.
But what happens is, if you've been hurt or traumatized or deeply challenged, an implicit memory forms. And in fact, trauma memories actually form easier and more densely and more quickly than you guys know this, than love or beauty. So if we get hurt or there's an intense issue that happens, or if there's a lack going on over time, a long period of time, what happens is that there's a place in the brain and in the body that sort of has to take over and say, okay, this is how things work. I got through this difficult traumatic experience by putting my head down and pushing with all my might.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And then the brain goes, aha, this is how to get through life. We put our head down, we push with all our might, and then we get through. This is one of the common ones, but there are hundreds and hundreds of programs like this that we can uncover and look at and understand. And the way the psyche works is the psyche wants us to wake up and work on these things. So it's always giving us an opportunity. It sort of knocks on the door with an implicit memory and says, hey, you lost your keys again, and where does that come from? Why am I always losing my keys? And then how do I feel when I lose my keys? Am I scared?
Mm-hmm.
Am I mad? Am I sad? And these programs really can take over our brain, like you guys know, and have us react. rather than respond to the actual environment we're in. And that's what I love about you guys' work, is because I can see you working with someone with where they're at in their head. And that's where we mostly are. A
Mhm.
brain physicist will tell you 90% of what we live is actually in here. It's not out there.
Mhm.
It's not our actual environment. And our actual environment is usually extremely safe and manageable. But if we have a program that we need to put our head down and push because we feel some danger, we might put our head down and push and just bump into the car in front of us because they're not going as fast as we are, or if you're standing in line at the grocery store and you feel someone breathing down your neck, I promise you, you can turn around and you can look and you can tell they have signs from when they were programmed that compel them to do that. It's not even a choice. They just do it. They do it. Their body does it. And I think for me, the deepest part of this potential of this work is if we can give kids and babies what they are asking for, and we need to understand it. It's not always what they're asking for with their words. It's often what they're asking for with their actions and with their sounds they're making. But if we can give them what they need, and usually we can, usually it's a pretty simple gift,
Mhm.
they feel happy and safe and fulfilled. And suddenly the stress goes out of the situation. And we weren't even talking about the symptom. We were talking about something underneath the symptom that we just happened to catch because we had a little bit of training. So I feel like our job together is to look at the training we can do, help people see what's going on at the real level, underneath the symptoms or underneath the crying
Yes.
because someone had Pitocin, or underneath the resistance because somebody had forceps. When we can look at the human being underneath and how they got programmed, and I call them, I don't know, I think somebody came up with this phrase. I love it. It's called hostage taking neural networks.
Yes, I've heard that.
They're the ones that run most of our lives
Yep.
and are most of our reactions. And guess what? When we find one of those, it's really easy to talk them down and have them let go,
Mm.
change the brain on that level. So I'm looking
Yeah.
forward to a collaboration because I feel like our work really fits together in a way that can help actual families have sweeter, fuller lives. They're happy. And
Yes.
you always, if there's one, especially if it's the baby, if there's an unhappy baby who's not sleeping, everybody's just miserable. But
Oh
if you
my
have a happy baby, everybody's in love because you
gosh.
love happy babies. So
It's so Danny, you have your you
Yeah,
have
I
your hand
wanted
up.
to share on that note because the work Paloma and I do, it's really about looking at certain movements, right? And so for my own son, he had an asymmetrical crawl, of course, because our kids come in to teach us so much. And a big slice of humble pie was served on that day. And because I'm in the brain business, I know that crawling means so much. And of course, my child has a kickstand crawl, which signifies primitive reflexes aren't integrated. But I have been working with him for a very long time. He's almost 8 years old now. And when I met Karlton and he did a birth mask reveal, and I learned what happened at my son's birth. I mean, I had a home birth. I did everything as I was supposed to. I went very holistic and tried so hard to be perfect, right? And I had to do everything right. And that pressure from society, right? Of
Yeah.
having to hit every certain thing perfectly. And then realizing that, oh my gosh, he possibly broke his nose at birth. And then that explained the breathing, which actually is connected to everything else. It gave me a whole new insight as to how many different things have to come together to help support us, our children, the family, the home. And so I think this is such a beautiful resource of just looking at things through a different lens of, oh my gosh, I didn't even know that was a thing. and it was
Oh.
so impactful.
You bring up a good point, Danny, and this like the story that I left off before introducing Karlton about my son is my daughter and I were doing brain balance essentially and brain reorganization movements together when I discovered writings about Karlton Terry. And I happened to be in a class with one of my teachers, Kate White, who was a student of Karlton's. And she had learned about these baby movements and how babies may be telling a story with their bodies, where they're touching themselves, or how if they have a kickstand crawl, how they may have been positioning themselves in utero. And it all of a sudden dawned on me, my daughter had a C-section birth, and we had this fallout of so much. And Karlton telling the story today about the program of pushing, that's me. I'm we use the word, direct recapitulator, but I was the rev, like always stacking my nervous system with more, even when it wasn't necessary. And my daughter was feeling this in my space. But before I could actually do the somatic work, if you will, with my son, or before the light bulbs went on, I had to rescue myself. And I was doing this program, which was really helping to calm my nerves. I was also training in cranial sacral therapy, which was a huge healing episode for me for a number of years. And then I could see that my son was set up in this same environment. But yet, because I was starting to unravel compassionately, really starting to understand, oh my gosh, there's a deeper story to myself. There's a deeper story to these emotions that I'm having. There's this implicit memories that I'm starting to unpack from my own childhood. It was like, wow, now I'm seeing this bigger world. And I was able to hold my son differently than I had with my daughter. And by the way, I don't want anybody to feel like she's left out, like she's an amazing, thriving, awesome human being. I mean, we went through a number of years with no sleep and a lot of high anxiety, but I've spent years helping her settle, and she's finally come there. But it's interesting. I just want parents to not have to go through so much work.
Yes.
And what we're setting ourselves up for, and what we teach at APPPAH, is that our birth scenarios of basically how little support there is for women in and around birth for their bodies and their emotions, is that there's also very little support for women and babies afterwards, and how we actually birth babies. And I'm just going to use the word trauma, because all of these disconnections, our disorganized brains, our asymmetrical holding patterns, or whatever you want to call it, implicit memories, triggers, they all come from overwhelming experiences. And literally we've had a few thousand years of overwhelming experiences for humanity. And so that's why we have this program. We've got our blindfolds on, and we're just looking at what mess we have to clean up in front of us, and not living this full encompassing life that is settled and we feel at ease. There's a lot that we have to overcome. And I love how your program gets people on their feet. It's okay, all right, now I can take some breaths. But Karlton, I'm wondering more about this compassionate connection that you uncover about how babies do experience trauma in the womb. What are some tips, if you will, that you offer in your practice and that you teach practitioners to help mitigate trauma for babies in the womb and even after birth?
Well, there's a lot. There's loads of stuff, and it all helps. And I just want to go back for a second, because Danny said something so important about the pressure from society to give a good birth, to do a good birth, to be a good mom. And oh my God, I can say I'm an expert on moms. Okay. I'm not sure I've met a mom who have sat in front of me and said, I did the perfect birth. I'm
Mm.
so happy.
Yeah.
Everything went, you know, and it breaks my heart because I know the precious aspect of the feminine archetype, the nurturing archetype. I mean, Diana is one of my favorite goddesses, right? You do your very best when you're giving birth, all the way through it, with the choices you have, with the pressures you have, with the surprises you have, if you're in a hospital, with the other kind of pressures you have. And so a big part of our business is getting moms to just like, oh, well, I don't have to forgive myself because
Mm.
I didn't do anything wrong. And
Mm.
when that moment enters a mother's body, something melts away. And we can always check it. We could check. Well, let's check with your husband. Does she need to apologize for anything she did during birth? I've never heard a husband say, "Yeah, she screwed up." Never,
Yeah.
never. I've,
Wow.
I've seen husbands who pass out while their
Right.
wives are giving birth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've asked babies. I've asked babies who can talk and babies who can talk with baby body language. Does you mother need to apologize for anything? And babies are like, what? It doesn't even register. So part of our love for the
Mhm.
feminine and the maternal, the Madonna, okay? The Madonna is you did your best. So where you're holding your shame or your devaluation of yourself, it's usually tied to some earlier guilt. We can find that, we can untie it, we can let it go. And wow, when you can let go of your inappropriate, improper guilt or shame over giving birth, all of a sudden, a lot of the stuff that your kids do that upset you doesn't bug you the same way. It
Yeah.
doesn't stress you out because it doesn't have anywhere to land. And then
Yes.
you're in a much more real relationship with your kid when you're just talking about them getting their shoes tied,
Mm.
That's
right?
so real. I feel like I mean, Danny, you and I've had this conversation a million times about exactly what Carlton just said. And that's why we love the fact that, once again, that we all came together, right? Because what we're doing is we look at it from the neurological perspective first. That's the very first part of our program, is getting you out of that survival mode where you're not hyper focused on the negative. You're not looking at everything as a threat. Every
Yeah.
single thing your husband says, the person that cut you off in traffic, the thing that your kid did that's just triggering you, right? That is
Mhm.
also, of course, from an emotional perspective, it's processed as, it's trauma, it's going back to your trauma, it's hitting your triggers, hitting those wounds that you have within you. But from a neurological perspective, when you go into that fight or flight mode, you're throwing your whole body into dysregulation. You are ready to, get out of that life or death situation when it's usually not a life or death situation,
Right.
right? It's
It feels like it in here.
Mm.
exactly.
That's the function of implicit memories. They
Yes,
literally make you feel like it's happening now.
Yeah.
It's not
exactly.
happening now, but that's how they function. And
Yeah, and the brain is very smart, but it's also not so smart in certain ways because it can't always tell what's real and what's not, right? So the primitive brain doesn't have logic, doesn't understand what's going on, doesn't understand, oh yeah, this is just my phone and it's a message that somebody didn't answer. It's not life or death, right?
Mhm.
The primitive brain is just prepped to survive and to keep you alive. And that's why it's so amazing, right? We come
Yeah,
from a place where we trained that they were looking at the primitive brain in a very negative way. It was like, no, say no to that primitive brain. We don't want that around here. It's like, no, we do want it when it's appropriate, when we
yeah,
need it, right? And so when you're walking down the street and there's a car that's going to run you over, you want that fight or flight mode. Boom, kick in,
immediately.
play,
Yeah.
freeze, whatever you need to do, right? But if
It's
it's
an option that you
day to
can
day,
choose when you need it.
exactly. And that option to choose comes from being able to have that regulation first. And then the other piece, which is where we really come together, all of us, is looking at the subconscious, right? And that's the second part of our program, is looking at all of these subconscious beliefs that you're talking about, Karlton, is the implicit memories, the trauma, all those things, they're
Mhm.
stored all over. And
Yeah.
so,
And
yeah. And so the first step is getting out of survival mode so you can address the rest of it.
that's why we call it enlightenment.
Yes.
It's just like who was it? Sartre said, no, who was it? Young. You don't get enlightened by studying images of light. You get enlightened by shining light into the areas where there's darkness and see what's
Yes.
in there. And we can do that. We can tiptoe into that. We can look at it. We can be there with it safely, and it can become our friend.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the
Absolutely.
thing that happens when we get hurt, when we're little, there's a body hurt that happens somewhere in the body, but there's also an emotional component. It's called prosody. It's a feeling. It's like, am I sad about this? And that emotional prosody, that emotional psychological content is like glue, and it holds together the
Mhm.
somatic pieces. It's one reason you can't just work with craniosacral therapy alone and have the same results as if you're working with craniosacral therapy and releasing the emotions that are attached to it and dealing with
Mhm.
those and knowing what they are. And so what we try to do is, craniosacral people, osteopaths, a lot of baby therapists they're elbow deep in the birth canal with the baby, and we want them
Yeah.
to where they are, is the baby in a rotating position? Is the baby stuck? Is the cord involved? And we can
Mhm.
find all of this out now. And that gives us a huge amount of confidence in what to do next and how to apply what we know with with the safety of knowing this is what the baby is telling us to do.
Yes.
I
That's
love
why
that.
you want to say,
Just to be
do we know how
clear,
to listen to our babies and what are they saying, right?
and that's exactly right, Paloma. But Karlton, just for those who are listening and may be like, wait, what? How is he understanding if there's a cord involved? But this is the process that Karlton you use is birth regression research. And this is
Mhm.
the foundation of this concept comes from implicit memory, that these memories are stored in your cells, not just in your brains, and that they can be activated.
And
And
there are somatic markers too. So you have
yes,
two
Mhm.
routes to follow to get there.
yes, there's cues or signs that babies show with their body, and even in relationships with their caretakers and how they respond. But there's specific training that you go through in order to recognize these languages that you're talking about. I mean, you've dubbed it baby body language. I know we have all sorts of tools that come with it, that's somatic based practices or regulation tools that incorporate polyvagal theory, or, as you say, craniosacral therapy. There's different modalities that support how to decode the story that
Mhm.
somebody is showing. And for a baby, they can't talk to you like verbally, but they can show you energetically. If
The
Mhm.
you're
beauty of
listening,
it is they can't talk to you and therefore they cannot mislead you.
Mm.
If
I
I
like
go to
that.
a doctor and I'm talking about my symptoms, I may not be talking about what's wrong with me. But when
Yes.
baby's talking, they're showing you exactly what's wrong and they're telling you exactly what they needed. Pure truth coming straight from the source. There's no persona involved, there's no ego involved. They're just, help, I need this attention right here. And they show you right where it is.
Yeah.
oh, well, that's why I read your book all the time. New Parenting Can
Thank
Change
you.
Your World, because it also says less stress, including the cure for colic. Because we actually, in therapy with babies, we can tell by their cry, their prosody of their cry, what emotions they may be feeling, and how we can map that back to a very specific time during the birth when or their birth journey, right, in the womb, of what may be happening to them in their environment, what may be happening to their caretakers. Because babies remember these things, and it's
Mhm.
it's programmed in. So I
Yeah, not explicitly, but
Yeah,
implicitly they remember them.
implicitly.
And there's such a clear difference now. Finally, this language is getting into our world, explicit memory.
Yes.
I had a cup of coffee when I was talking to those guys. Implicit memory was my hand knows how to get the coffee up to my mouth. I'm not even thinking about it. It's just my
Yes.
body
Right.
does it.
One of the pioneers in the pre and perinatal sciences, who's an embryologist, Jaap van der Wal, he says the embryo within us is always present. Our younger selves. This is, the whole idea of the inner child journey. We carry this youngest part of ourselves. You even said it, Danny, when you're explaining, you can tell how they move, where they've left off in their development, or where there's what we call in our terms ruptures. And where those ruptures are like little landmines, are emotional triggers waiting to be found, like Karlton said, coming knocking on your door, because healing always wants to happen. And I'm just so grateful that all of us have been able to come together. And this is a preview of our talk that we're going to do at APPPAH during Birth Psychology Month in March, next month, just a few weeks away, but March 22nd. We will all be coming together to give a little bit more in-depth details of exactly what we're talking about, specifically how maybe even these postures in the womb are leading to what you see in your work, like the crawl and the primitive reflexes that aren't inhibited. So I know we're going to explain and uncover more details. So stay tuned. And Karlton, we can reach you through ktbabytherapy.com.
Anytime. Yeah.
And
Okay.
Danny, and how do we get in touch with you guys at In the Cortex?
Paloma's got this.
You, I do the contact piece. You can, our website is inthecortex.com. You can always email us at hello@inthecortex.com. And our social media has so much information. If you're a video person, we have so many videos on there. Our Instagram is inthecortex_US, and our TikTok is in_the_cortex. And we have tons of info there.
Oh, that's great. And me signing off with APPPAH, we're at birthpsychology.com. And again, I'm the director of education there. And I am so pleased that all of us could get together. And I'm excited about what future endeavors that we have as our worlds start to collaborate and unfold into understanding how we can build more compassionate connections with ourselves, with our children, well, with everybody. So let's get on board with this whole nurture revolution. Yeah. Like I know.
Yeah.
I'm so excited that this information is starting to get more mainstreamed and it's not as crazy. And even me having my kids 4 and 8 years ago, I was so lost. I was focused on the things that we thought we should be focused on, baby registries and that sort of stuff, when I wish I did a whole lot more work on the emotional stuff and really diving into the importance of the pre and perinatal psychology, because that's what really matters. That stroller you're going to outgrow in a year, like 2.
Yeah.
But those thoughts are everlasting. And, I love that these conversations are being had and we are forging a new way for parents to find this. And I know there's a huge sense of people wanting to get on board with this. And I love that it's accessible and it's really not too crazy. And like we talked about before, you don't have to have a crazy degree to really understand what's happening in the communication aspect. So we're excited to be a part of this. So thank you.
This is one thing that feels so important to me, is that when you use the word science, it scares people. We say pre and perinatal sciences. I don't feel like I ever talk about anything that's not self-evident. And if I am, and if I have to describe it, then I start doubting. So if it's self-evident and you can believe it and you can feel it in your body, that doesn't mean it's not science.
Oh, I love that. So real.
Well, and it gets back to the root of what's broken. And that is our connection to ourselves as fully functional gods, goddesses, whatever you like, in complete control of ourselves, that we have intuition, and that by human design, all of this information is within us. We just have to unlock our hearts.
Yeah. Oh, I love that.
Love that. That is 100% the way that we feel as well. We could talk about this for hours.
Oh, I'm excited. We will return in March on the 22nd. So join us again for a deeper conversation about what is your baby telling you and are you listening?
Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, that was our episode. Thank you so much for listening. I'm going to do our little outro. So remember, if you are ready to sign up for our brain reorganization program, use promo code BRAINIAC to get $10 off your very first payment. And please subscribe, share this episode, share all of your favorite episodes with your friends. Let's spread the word that the brain can change and life can get so much easier. Let's also follow us on Instagram at @inthecortex_US. We have TikTok at @in_the_cortex, and Facebook is in the cortex US. Remember, we also have video. If you're watching this as a video, you know that this is already a video. If not, if you're listening to this, you also can watch the video version of our podcast on our YouTube channel, which is also in the cortex US. And make sure to email us if you have any questions, if anything's coming up, if you want to set up a free 15-minute call. All of that info is on our website. It's inthecortex.com. Thank you so much, and we will see you next week.